All right, this is from the Joint House Inquiry. Panelist Dianne Feinstein is interviewing Chris Kojm, Deputy Coordinator from the Deputy Coordinator of Intelligence and Research, and an FBI agent hidden behind a screen. And he is Steve Bongardt from the Counter-terrorism Center of the FBI. Let's see what they have to say.
Senator Feinstein.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. I think Congressman Romer raised a good issue. And because some of us worked on the Border Security and Visa Entry Reform Act, we just pulled the law. And it's, as you know, there wasn't an interoperable database. My understanding that the law provides that now there should be one. Whether all the security databases provided for in this law are now operable is a question I'd like to ask.
Senator, is that addressed
If you don't mind.
I can answer that in part, and that is that we do provide to the Foreign Terrorism Tracking Task Force, we began providing data on all the unclassified data elements of every individual in the tip-off database. So that is provided to domestic law enforcement. Moreover, we do provide...
Now, is it provided to INS so that if an individual asks for an extension on the visa and that watch list, and they're on the watch list, that INS has that data at their fingertips now?
INS would have access to that information through the Foreign Terrorism Tracking Task Force, in which INS is an integral member.
Okay, this is an important question because of the fact that you have a national terrorist database like Tip-Off, which is basically just a database that has suspected individuals involved with Arab terrorism or terrorism abroad with terrorist Arab or non-Arab terrorist organizations, but mostly these Arabs. Anyway, that the database is actually easily accessible to a domestic agency like the Immigration and Naturalization Services, so that if the INS were basically in the middle of an application process of a individual, they could run his profile with the Tip-Off database, terrorist database. Now, this was allegedly provided to the FBI and INS and other agencies, local and state, federal enforcement, and federal law enforcement. But there's a wall between these agencies in regards to sharing of data. And that was the problem pre-9/11. After 9/11, every single agency has access to every single thing. For example, the NSA, which is the leading agency in the world when it comes to data collection, no agency on earth besides the GCHQ in Great Britain is bigger, collects all this signals intelligence, phone calls, emails, and text messages of every single American. And this is accessible to the DEA, the DIA, the CIA, the FBI, your local law enforcement, wherever you live in any city or town. And now all these agencies, of the judicial agencies and as well as the intelligence services, all have access on you, the American. And we could thank 9/11 for that.
That is my understanding, Senator.
These agencies are not playing honestly.
I think we ought to check that one out. Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to state publicly, and then I wanted to ask the two agents a quick question. The one thing that comes through to me very strongly from the staff report is how easy it is for those who would do us harm to use our system falsely, to game it, to get into the country, and how much they knew about our system.
Still happens.
You know, it's amazing to me that when the expedited access program went into play in May of 2001, the very next month, 5 of the hijackers avoided a personal interview by using that speedy access system in Saudi Arabia, which
Right.
has been since, as I understand it from the staff report, done away with. They knew how to get multiple entry visas. They knew how to get a new passport to avoid saying where they traveled and how often they traveled. 6 of them knew they could go to a bank and actually make up a social security number and that the bank wouldn't check that number, which they did do, and an FBI agent in, matter of fact, my subcommittee in Judiciary came in and testified to that. So I think what we really need to know is that we've really got to keep going over our systems and making recommendations of how they can be strengthened to avoid just this kind of thing. I wanted to talk just for a moment with the 2 agents.
Yeah, this is a big, let me go into detail about this, is that the 9/11 hijackers, some of them had opened up banks and bank accounts here in the United States, mainly in Florida and in Virginia and New York and New Jersey and California. They were able to have access to institutions that require a valid passport, a valid ID card, a valid background. However, even before they got to the United States, a lot of these hijackers were applied for US visas in Riyadh and in Jeddah, 2 of the biggest cities in Saudi Arabia. Now, there was at the time a program called US Visa Express Program, specifically for the Saudis themselves, trying to repair and gain trust in the relations of this problematic country, which has a long history with the United States that goes back to 1932. Now, the problem with this is that they allowed for an influx of people who have links to terrorist organizations like Hamas and like Al-Qaeda and Abu Sayyaf to come inside the United States. But it was basically Al-Qaeda operatives or people who were linked to Al-Qaeda and their affiliates to come inside the United States because a lot of these applications were approved. Now, one consular officer who worked out of the, I think the Jeddah consular was J. Michael Springman. Now, during the late 1990s, he was receiving applications from these people who barely could speak English, who didn't have any financial ties to any banks here or abroad. They basically couldn't tell them where they were going, couldn't tell them who they were meeting. So these applications were put on hold and they weren't approved. However, there was somebody who is a step above him named Shanya Steiger, a US consular officer and has ties to the CIA, who basically approved all these applications. I think there was like 25 applications, with most, or half of them, belonging to members of the September 11th attacks, the muscle hijackers, basically. When these people got to the United States, a lot of the pilots, such as Mohammed Atta and Marwan al-Shehi, have opened up SunTrust, the SunTrust bank accounts in Florida. Now, they chose a number of banks like the Bank of America, but they chose SunTrust and Hudson United Bank and Dime Savings Bank in New Jersey. Now, I think with Atta and Shehi, they chose SunTrust because of their choice of a flight school in Florida. And the muscle hijackers were later linked up with Mohammed Atta, like Hamza al-Ghamdi, Ahmed al-Ghamdi, Saeed al-Ghamdi, Mohand al-Sheri, Fayez Bani Hamad. These guys opened up bank accounts, and there's no information available as to how or why they chose their banks. I guess they just chose them in the cities where they lived because it was affordable at the time. Now, there were 2 alleged high-ranking Al-Qaeda operatives named Mustafa al-Hassawi and Abdul Aziz Ali, also known as Amr al-Baluchi, who's a nephew of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. They're both in Guantanamo Bay. One of the 9/11 operators, Fayez Bani Hamad, who would be a muscle hijacker for Flight 175, just days before the attacks, he wired back. He had a Florida SunTrust account and transferred $8,055 to a standard chartered bank account that belonged to Mustafa Hasnawi. And basically, al-Hasnawi was one of the main financial go-betweens with the hijackers, handling mostly the muscle men. And Ali Abdul Aziz Ali, Amr al-Baluchi, was handling mostly the German Hamburg pilots. In June of 2001, al-Hassawi opened up a bank account at the Standard Chartered Bank in Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates, and he obtained an ATM card. He also rented a PO box as well. He purchased the airline tickets for Fayez Bani Hamad and Saeed Al-Ghamdi to travel from Dubai to Orlando via London as well, and provided assistance and gave money to other Muslim men as they transited the UAE and flew to the United States as well. And he was also given a power of attorney for Bani Hamad's bank account because Bani Hamad was killed as 175 crashed into the South Tower. Now, according to the 9/11 Commission, the hijackers were not experts on the use of U.S. financial system and basically opened all these accounts basically with some of them, their real profiles. Some of the muscle hijackers use fake accounts, fake ID cards, but their passports were legitimate. And that's because they shouldn't have been. And that's what I was talking about with some of these agencies abroad and here domestically, foreign and domestically, is that all these agencies didn't have the access to a database like Tip-Off, or else they would have had these guys red flagged for having connections to Afghanistan. Now, because Afghanistan is known as a hotspot for Al-Qaeda training camps and Pakistan as well, these people would actually be red flagged and watched. But according to Dubai, United Arab Emirates, one of the 9/11 pilots named Ziad Jarrah, who is the alleged pilot for Flight 93, he basically had a passport coming out of Afghanistan and he had terrorist material in his suitcase. So what did they do? They knew he was coming to the United States, going to Florida. They basically called the CIA. What did the CIA tell them? CIA says, no, go ahead, let him through. Yeah, that's what they said. So, I mean, you know, you have a lot of these hidden shadows behind these agencies who basically almost seemingly wanted these people to be given permission or allow them to have access to a passport, a bank account, an ID card, some of them fake, some of them real. And this is the problem that we have with a lot of these agencies in the intelligence community pre-9/11.
If I could, about the
And
wall.
so that's where the truth, you know, 9/11 truth movement, this is where the real.
Because this is something that many of us on judiciary have been interested in. And as you well know, it involves FISA. And in the paper.
Oh, and by the way, just to add to, the Visa Express program involved hundreds of applicants as well to come inside the United States to repair relations with Saudi Arabia. And basically this was eliminated, I think, in 2000.
Patriot Act, we made a couple of amendments. We changed the primary purpose having to be from intelligence point of view to a significant purpose being from an intelligence point of view. And we also enacted a section which is called a new coordination provision that provides for coordination in the law with law enforcement. And I want to just read to you a couple of the points and see if you believe it covers what we need to cover. Federal officers, well, in other words, the FISA Act is amended by adding federal officers who conduct electronic surveillance to acquire foreign intelligence information under this title may consult with federal law enforcement officers to coordinate efforts to investigate or protect against actual or potential attack or other grave hostile acts of a foreign power or an agent of a foreign power. sabotage or international terrorism by a foreign power or an agent, clandestine intelligence activities by an intelligence service or network of a foreign power or by an agent, and coordination authorized under other sections. So clearly, there is a very clear consultation that is permissible now under FISA between the intelligence community and the so-called Title III law enforcement community. My question to you, and I'm sure you've probably reviewed this, is do the agents, for the most part, that you come into contact with believe that this is a significant improvement and that that wall, you mentioned something about the wall being broken down, but is down sufficiently so that you're not hampered when you have to perform one of these investigations?
Well, before Steve answers, I mean, the huge elephant in the room regarding FISA and pre-9/11 is the story of Zacarias Moussaoui. Now, I've brought this up before regarding Zacarias Moussaoui and the FISA warrant to search his belongings, because you need a FISA warrant to search any personal items belonging to an individual of a foreign nation, because Zacarias Moussaoui basically was on a U.S. visa, and he basically entered the United States as a tourist, I believe, not a student. I think it was a tourist visa. The problem is that the FBI was basically getting information, especially Minneapolis FBI, an individual who worked at the FBI office named Harry Samit, who was contacted by a flight instructor who basically said that there's an individual here who is asking suspicious questions about wanting to fly the plane, not landing, and how to cut off oxygen, blah, blah, blah. And so the FBI went to interview Zacarias Moussaoui. He was with another individual named Hussein Al-Attas, and they were in a hotel room, and they basically found them to be quite suspicious and detained them, but they couldn't search their belongings. Now, Moussaoui had a laptop, Hussein Al-Attas had personal belongings, and Moussaoui had personal belongings in the hotel room. Now, they're not allowed to search those items without a warrant, but it couldn't be a regular warrant involving U.S. citizens, so it had to go through a FISA process. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act warrant basically was not given any type of approval because the radical fundamentalist unit headed by Marion Bowman and Rita Flack and Dave Frasca, who basically were arguing, and Bob Bowman, I'm sorry, Marion Bowman, I said Bob Bowman, I'm sorry, Marion Bowman, not Bob, basically were arguing with Harry Samit over the legality and the wording of the warrant. Since this was a, it wasn't a criminal warrant, it was an intelligence warrant, I could have that mixed around, turned around. And they were arguing over that, and they were arguing over the legality and the definitions of certain words. So in other words, real tedious nonsense. However, all this doesn't matter because the months prior to Moussaoui's detainment, French officials where Moussaoui lived in France basically faxed to the FBI in Minneapolis regarding even after he was arrested. But weeks prior, they were faxing the FBI field office in Minneapolis about Moussaoui's links to terrorism groups, one specifically belonging to Abu Hamza. Abu Hamza is a notorious Salafi who basically had connections to a number of German terrorist groups. Abu Hamza al-Masri, I was trying to think of his last name. He is a guy, everybody knows him by his hook on his hand. He basically has a hook. And his connections with groups in Egypt and in Saudi Arabia. And he also has connections because he fought in Bosnia against the Serbs in the early 1990s. So his connections with these terrorist groups and the obvious connection with Zacarias Moussaoui, that alone should have been more than enough for the warrant to have been approved, and it was not until the day after 9/11. Coincidence, I guess.
Yes, Senator.
Let's hear Bongart's answer.
With regards to some walls, that wall, it definitely has helped. I will submit to you that even since the Patriot Act, of which I requested a copy, so I had it in writing, I have read on more than one occasion to some individual that was attempting to withhold information from me, just what you just read right there. So old habits die hard, I think, with regards to certain things. It has certainly helped to this point. With regards to the other wall that Senator DeWine had mentioned earlier, I believe there's there's so many different types of walls with regards to intelligence and criminal, but with regards to the FISA specifically, that one seems to have helped. With regards to what Senator DeWine talked about, the other wall, we still have to deal with that on pretty much a daily basis.
Because we just had a hearing in Judiciary, and the Justice Department, as you know, the FISA court, I think only for the second time in its history, has just produced an opinion saying to the Justice Department, where they tried to sort of entirely break down the wall in terms of the application for a FISA process, that the significant purpose test remains. And the Justice Department apparently did not want it to remain. The FISA court had a unanimous opinion. That opinion is now on appeal. Do you have a view on that subject?
No, ma'am. I think there is some document that I was handed within the last week that talks about that specifically, and is going to be circulated to the field, but I don't have any knowledge of that.
Thank you. Does the other agent have any knowledge of that?
I'm from the CIA, and most of this is Greek. I'm sorry, with all respect,
All right.
I don't.
Well, it was.
Yeah, it would be Greek to you. The CIA doesn't actually really involve themselves with a FISA warrant, actually, because they're allowed to go outside the bounds of the United States law, because they are not uphold to U.S. laws strictly. Unlike the FBI, which is a domestic agency, the CIA is a global agency, and they break the law every single damn day.
It still is to some extent with me. Mr. Rollins, do you have a view on that?
Senator, let me start at the beginning and move forward. I'm not a legal expert, and as you know, Spike Bowman, the Deputy General Counsel, will be with you next week to walk through this. But unquestionably, the concerns that my colleague raised about the issue of opening criminal or intel goes by the wayside with the Patriot Act, and it's probably one of the most substantial positive changes that you could have put into place to allow us to move information as quickly as we possibly can in situations like that. In addition to that, the change from a two-pronged test to just relevancy in order for us to get national security letters, pen registers, information like that is also a help, as are the expanded timeframes for which the FISAs on both United States persons and non-U.S. persons are in effect. There is one area that we're still in debate on, and that's our ability to use the roving. We're trying to work through that. We would like in counterintelligence and counterterrorism the exact same capabilities we have if we're working public corruption or organized crime cases. I think there's still an issue to be worked out there. Finally, as regards the last piece, my understanding of it is the degree to which criminal prosecutors will be able to guide, direct, and manage the FISA process, and I think that is part of what is still being adjudicated, if I have it right.
You know, before 9/11, I mean, a lot of these agencies, like the FBI, the INS, the CIA, the DIA, local and state law enforcement, you know, the visa program, these embassies here and abroad, and you know, all these people have walls. Basically, these walls were made to protect the clients that they serve from competing agencies who may want to overstep their bounds. After 9/11, all these walls came down. Okay, now all these agencies have basically access to everything about everyone at any time. And this is how you build a totalitarian environment, and it's dangerous. And this is the reason why I continue to study the events of September 11th, because September 11, 2001 gave us a new world. And this world actually broke the rule of law. All right, there are no laws. This is a land of wolves, as Benicio del Toro told that female police officer in the film Sicario, because you live in a land of wolves now. Go to a town that has still has the rule of law. Well, the United States is basically becoming a land of wolves, and there's hardly anywhere where the rule of law exists, and that's because of the events of September 11, 2001. And this is the reason why I do these videos, is because when you have an intelligence agency like the NSA, and everybody likes to talk about the CIA, yeah, they are an evil entity. The NSA, after 9/11, became the leading agency regarding power in the world, because their job is to collect intelligence on every single body on the face of the earth, every single American, not everybody on the earth, every single American. And what happens is that before 9/11, all these intelligence agencies that based on signals intelligence, like the GCHQ, like the NSA, and the CGC in Canada, all these agencies, another intelligence agency from Denmark and Australia, India, Pakistan, all right? Now, all these agencies were separate, and they didn't share the data of their citizens to another country. After 9/11, that was no longer the case. All these agencies now share with each other information about civilians all over the world with each other. Before 9/11, those walls existed. After 9/11, those walls no longer exist. Now, there was a corporation called the Five Eyes, which is the 5 leading intelligence agencies regarding signals intelligence in the world, right? Now it's like 30, 35. It's huge. It's massive. And all they do is collect text messages, emails, listen to phone calls, and store it. For the NSA, they store it in a database called the Utah Data Center in Pine Bluff, Utah. Why do they do that? Because intelligence, information gathering, is the primary goal of every single agency in the world, intelligence agency. Collect data by whatever means you mean it. But get it. That was the NSA. That's what they told Thomas Drake, former senior executive, and also cryptanalyst William Binney, Kirk J. Wiebe, Ed Loomis, and others. So, you know, these agencies don't abide by the law anymore, because we live in a land of wolves.